So let's dive in to a fairly deep subject. And it comes out of what we talked about some yesterday, Matthew chapter 12, in verse 32, or excuse me, 31, Jesus says, "And so I tell you, every sin and blasphemy will be forgiven men, but the blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven." That's big. That's big. And we scratched the surface of it last time. So, okay, first little caveat here. I am not an authority on this subject. I can share with you, and all I'm gonna do is share with you what my limited ability for research and my own thought has led me to about this subject of blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. Jesus goes on in verse 32 and says, "Anyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven. But anyone who speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either in this age, its current time, or in the age to come." In eternity, as what I get from that. Although, again, this is one of the reasons why it's such a foggy subject, is Jesus may have been speaking when he said, in this day, right, in this age, meaning before the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the day of Pentecost. And after, in the age to come, that could be the period of time after the day of Pentecost. One of the reasons why that seems, possible is that on the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit came in a way that it had never come before. It had, in the Old Testament, it had come upon people, but it had never dwelt in people. And from the day of Pentecost forward, the Holy Spirit came to dwell within the believer. Okay, now, Jesus, that doesn't explain very much. Just, two separate ages. Okay, but the point is, you can say a word against the Son of God, Jesus, and don't forget, he was speaking directly to the Pharisees. And so we got to keep it in its context, number one, speaking to the Pharisees who had spoken not just a word, but many words against Jesus. And he said that can be forgiven. But if you blaspheme the Holy Spirit, that won't be forgiven. And in fact, I think he says, never be forgiven. Okay, so now we got to do a little more thought about what is blasphemy. The meaning of the word is reducing it, and there's lots of stuff written about this by different authors with different perspectives. I think the definition, though, is generally broadly accepted to be to intentionally speak words against or speak intentionally, derogatorily about, it's almost like slander, where if a person speaks intentionally, coarsely, negatively, dishonestly about God or the things of God, that was considered blasphemy, and still is, as far as I'm concerned. The blasphemy was not a new idea for Jesus and the Jews of his day. The Old Testament, the book of Leviticus, talks about blasphemy. And in fact, the law prescribed a punishment for blaspheming. The blasphemer was to be stoned to death. It was a serious charge, number one. And if it was found to be true, I mean, it's capital punishment. Okay. One of the things, and maybe I would say the first thing about interpreting blasphemy here in this passage, is nobody can accidentally blaspheme God. You don't need to be afraid, have I blasphemed God in some way? No, because for it to be blasphemy, for you to blaspheme, you have to intentionally, knowingly, wittingly say these abusive, negative, derogatory, untrue things about God or the Holy Spirit. Now, so that, first of all, in my opinion, if you ever blaspheme the Holy Spirit, it won't be accidental. You will know what you're doing, and you will be doing it because you intended to. You don't, okay. Now, again, within its context, who is Jesus speaking to? The Pharisees, the teachers of the law, the religious rulers. They weren't just leaders, they were rulers in Israel in Jesus' day. And what had precipitated Jesus making this statement was them saying of Jesus that he cast out demons by the power of demons. And I don't mean to split hairs, but Jesus, he said, if you say a bad word against me, well, okay, that can be forgiven. But if you blaspheme the Holy Spirit, that will not be forgiven. And this idea that they had attributed to Satan what had been the work of the Holy Spirit through Jesus, that was blasphemy. Okay, a little snippet here. I got this from William Barclay. He's not right about everything, but boy, when it comes to ancient first century religious traditions, he is. I mean, he's been dead for a long, long time, since the 70s, but he's an authority, one to trust in that. Okay, now there are other things that he has written that not so much, but this, yeah, okay. So he says a Jewish understanding of the Holy Spirit was that he had two primary distinct roles in a Jew's life. First of all, the Holy Spirit brought the truth of God. Okay, and secondly, he gave men and women, people, the ability to understand it if they chose to. Now, their view, again, of the Holy Spirit was a force working on them, but not in them. So when Jesus spoke of the Holy Spirit, this was not a foreign idea to them. They had a concept, right? Okay. This, in my opinion, was not hyperbole. I think Jesus was speaking absolute truth. There's literally any sin is forgivable except the sin of blaspheming the Holy Spirit. I don't think I cleared the waters very much. So let's move on. Verse 33, make a tree good, and its fruit will be good. Okay, now we're into horticulture, symbolically and literally. If you make a tree good, the fruit is going to be good. Or make a tree bad, and its fruit will be bad, for a tree is recognized by its fruit. Okay? If you've ever tended a fruit tree, the only way I can think of to make a tree bad is to deprive it of nutrients and water, or to introduce some destructive substance into the water. How do you make good fruit? You tend to a tree so that it will be good, and the fruit it produces will be good. And then he goes on in verse 34, you brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? Ooh, that is a very strong word. For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. But I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. Yikes. Okay. Good trees produce good fruit. Bad trees produce bad fruit. You distinguish one kind of fruit tree from another by the fruit that it bears. Jesus was, he was going for it kind of with this, what seems to me a little bit soft analogy. But the point is, it's the fruit. It's the fruit, or lack of, or the bad fruit. And the implication is obvious. You guys are producing bad fruit. And then he goes on to say, what you say is because of what's in your heart. And then it's very strong. But I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. Ooh. All right, now let's put it in this context. He's talking directly to the Pharisees, and Jesus is saying, hey, you will give an account for what you've said. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. Is that a promise or a word that applies to us today? Well, kinda. Here's what I mean by that. At the day of judgment, now, after the cross, after the resurrection, after sin is paid for, the only sin that is not forgivable is the sin of blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. But what acquits us is not our words or deeds anymore, but God's grace. So does that mean our words don't mean anything? Well, no. Our words are gonna mean something significant. But it's now a matter of, will I humble myself and accept God's grace, accepting Jesus as his son, who he said he was, or will I not? There's going to be, one of the ways I interpret this, and I'm going to go long here, I should have warned you before, is that at the day of judgment, I think my words, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I think my words are going to be part of the deal. But I think Jesus is going to say, I paid for that. That is forgiven. I believe I've never blasphemed the Holy Spirit. All my other sin, all the sin in my life then, has been fully, finally, completely forgiven by Jesus. I believe this is true of you. But I also believe my words are powerful, and I must be careful with them. There's a principle here that applies to all of us. All right, that's as muddy as I can make it. Sorry. I'll do better, I hope, next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.